G'day, welcome to this series investigating Jesus Christ. Together we will explore the life of the most amazing person who ever lived, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. This is week 17. Last week we looked at what Jesus taught. This week we will look at who Jesus taught. All Gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, attribute Jesus as a teacher. Mark 5 verse 35 and John 7 verse 15, for example. This was despite Jesus' lack of formal requirements usually attained by the religious rabbis. And all the Gospel writers also refer to Jesus as being a prophet. Luke 7 verse 16 and John 6 verse 14. And Jesus was recognized as such by people. Mark 6 verse 15 and Mark 8 verse 28. There were three main groups of people that Jesus interacted with and taught. There were large crowds, his close 12 disciples, and the religious leaders. Firstly, let's look at the crowds. When Jesus taught large gatherings of people, it was always based on evidential facts, and it was always, as Luke describes, good news. Luke 4 verse 18, for example. Why? Because God had given it to Jesus. And the crowds recognized that Jesus had a confident manner of speaking. Mark 1 verse 22. But we note here that in the presence of crowds, Jesus never actively revealed who he really was. Mark 1 verse 44, Mark 3 verse 11 to 12, and Mark 9 verse 9. Just three examples. So Jesus taught the crowds. And then at the other end, Jesus also taught his close disciples, as a group and as individuals. And many of Jesus' recorded teachings were to his disciples, but also amongst crowds, as we've seen, such as the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through to Matthew 7. However, on more precise requirements of discipleship, or revealing about himself or the future of God's kingdom, Jesus usually only taught his close disciples concerning Jesus' own true identity, even though lots of times the disciples failed to grasp it. An example is Mark 8 verse 27 to 33. And our third group whom Jesus taught were the religious leaders. Because of Jesus' growing popularity and the activities that he was involved with, the religious leaders soon took notice of him. In all ways, Jesus respected the law of Moses and Moses' authority. Mark 1 verse 22. However, Jesus also gave his own unique interpretation of the law and the teaching. So much so that this attracted the opposition of the religious leaders who had taught a different interpretation. An example of this can be seen in Jesus' interpretation of the Sabbath, Mark 2 verse 23 to 38, the healings that he performed, John 5 verse 1 to 18, and in fasting and ritual cleanliness, Mark 7 verses 1 to 5. And he was also regarding his consorting with sinners, Luke 7 verse 34. And Jesus criticized the religious leaders, for, amongst other things, their lack of compassion and the weighty burdens which they placed upon others. Matthew 23, Mark 12, verse 38 to 40, and Luke 11, verse 37 to 54. These burdens and weights which were put upon people by the religious leaders were often used as a measure of control over those people, and also for the financial and prosperous gain of the religious leaders and authorities. And that's today, in the 21st century, when we see, even within the church today, signs of spiritual abuse. I know because I've met and counselled people who have been affected by abusive church leadership. That's it for today. Next episode, we will start looking at what Jesus taught about himself and who Jesus said that he really was. See you later. And come back every day to Partakers Podcasts to learn more about how you can live as a disciple of Jesus Christ in the 21st century. See you later.